Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to ancient Greece, where marble statues glow by torchlight sandals slap gently against sun-baked stone, and wisdom has a feathered face. You're perched high above Athens long before the traffic, the tourists or the endless espresso bars. The air smells of figs, bronze and distant sea salt. The Parthenon hasn't even been built yet. And somewhere below an owl blinks its amber eyes and stretches its wings beneath the stars. This is Athena's city, not just in name but in soul. She hasn't slept in centuries, and she certainly isn't starting tonight. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You glide low over the rooftops of early Athens. No neon, no streetlights, just oil lamps flickering like slow fireflies. Somewhere in the hills, shepherds are coaxing stubborn goats. In the agora, a stray dog noses through fish bones. It's peaceful in that particular ancient way, quiet but never still. But above it all, in a way no one else quite notices, the owl perches. Athena's owl. It's more than just a bird, of course. The Greeks weren't big on pets with no symbolism. This owl is her avatar, her scout, her watchful eye when she's too busy solving celestial disputes to monitor olive exports in person. It turns its head unnaturally far and watches you back. You get the unsettling sense it could read your SAT scores. Athena herself doesn't sleep. That's not a metaphor. She literally doesn't. Gods don't need REM cycles. But even among them, she's notorious for pulling all-nighters. While Dionysus snoozes off his sixth goblet, and Ares polishes his weapons like he's in a cologne, and Athena is double-checking war strategies, tutoring demigods, and probably inventing algebra for fun. Historians still argue whether Athena's owl was a native Aegean species or a symbolic import from older Near Eastern traditions. Some fringe theorists even think the owl was originally a Mesopotamian death bird that got a PR rebrand. Either way, it's here. And it's watching. Down below, early Athenians begin to stir. A potter rolls out of bed and scratches his back with a brush handle. A child sneaks a fig before chores begin. You drift past an open window where a woman whispers a morning prayer, not to Zeus, not to Apollo, but to Athena. Because when you want something done right, you don't call the guy with lightning bolts and drama. You call the one with blueprints and backup plans. Athena's presence in the city is silent but everywhere, in the careful layout of the streets, in the school teacher's chalk-stained fingers, in the absence of chaos, not its opposite, but its refinement. She doesn't need to shout to be felt. And while the mortals busy themselves with their clunky sandals and bread-making, the gods on Olympus glance downward. Poseidon sulks near his tide charts. Hera is aggressively pruning a rosebush. Zeus, always the showboat, lounges on a storm cloud, hurling sarcastic remarks at passing eagles. But Athena, she's already reviewing military reports and philosophical scrolls, occasionally shaking her head when someone misuses a simile. You hover above her temple, still just a stone foundation at this point, no fancy marble yet. But it's already sacred, already buzzing with the kind of hum that makes your skin tingle. An early priestess kneels, brushing ash in a perfect circle. Her hands are cracked, her face is tired, but her focus is steady. Athena doesn't demand blood or chaos. She demands clarity. And maybe that's what makes her so exhausting. There's a myth that says Athena was never born a child. She burst fully grown, fully armed from Zeus's head. No toddler years, no teen rebellion phase. Just one big cranial pop and bam instant career woman. Fringe scholars love to speculate about this. Was it a metaphor for ideas, for headaches, for divine migraines? One German classicist wrote an entire thesis comparing it to male anxiety over female intellect. Another just called it the world's worst sinus pressure. But you just float warm and weightless in the rising Athenian light. The city exhales. The owl takes flight again, and Athena, somewhere unseen but deeply felt, begins her day. Again. She won't clock out. Not today, not tomorrow. Because if she ever did, the city might collapse under its own confusion. Someone would invent a disastrous tax system. Philosophers would misquote each other in stone. The warriors would forget which side they were on. So she stays. She watches. And if you look closely enough in the quiet moments between stars and sunrise, you might see her shadow ripple across the Acropolis stone's helmet, gleaming eyes half-lidded with that special kind of divine exasperation. Because someone has to keep it all running. And it's definitely not going to be Zeus. You follow the owl as it glides inland over pine trees, rocky hills and olive groves trembling under a soft breeze. The light changes slowly now, slipping from pale blue to golden, and the land warms under it like a creature waking up. Farmers step into furrowed fields. Goats bleat. Somewhere a lyre begins to pluck its sleepy way through a scale. But Athena. She's already finished her first project of the day. See, Athena's not just the goddess of war. That's a common mistake. If Ares is the blunt object of divine warfare, Athena is the Swiss Army knife. She doesn't swing randomly. She strategizes, calculates, innovates. She's the reason hoplites fought in phalanxes, and the reason shields were round and bronze instead of awkward rectangles carved from whatever was lying around. And war isn't even her favorite subject. She has a soft spot for city planning. No, really. Athena could spend centuries reorganizing the sewage layout of Corinth. She's the kind of deity who'd attend a zoning board meeting voluntarily and bring homemade scrolls of traffic flow diagrams. Historians still argue whether her love of cities was inherited from older goddesses of civilization like Sumerian Nisaba or Egyptian Seshat, but everyone agrees she was hands-on. You drift down toward a construction site, an early settlement where homes are being built from sun-dried clay and stone. There are no cranes or concrete trucks here, just sweat muscle and primitive pulleys. Athena's influence hums in the background as two men argue about load-bearing walls. One insists on symmetry. The other mutters about wind direction and goat smell. Somewhere nearby, a child is drawing shapes in the dust with a stick, unaware that she's sketching the future street grid. And even here, amid the dust and noise, Athena is watching. She doesn't appear with fanfare. No trumpets, no flash. She arrives more like a solution to a problem. A better design, a clever compromise. She might whisper a suggestion to the carpenter's hand or tilt a falling beam just enough to miss someone's head. If you blink, you miss it. If you're half asleep, you feel it. That's Athena's real style. Low-key intervention. Now, technically, gods weren't supposed to meddle with mortals on weekdays. Zeus made some kind of rule about it, though no one followed it, including Zeus. But Athena's meddling never felt like meddling. More like quality control. You get the sense she keeps a checklist tucked under her Aegis one that includes things like teach bronze smith about airflow and stop Achilles from using the wrong fork again. And if you're wondering why she's so invested in mortals when most gods barely remember their names, well, here's a little secret. Athena doesn't think mortals are stupid. She thinks they're unfinished, which is why she never takes a day off. Not because she's some divine workaholic who gets off on spreadsheets, though she does love a good schematic, but because she sees potential in you, in all of you, even the one who can't quite figure out how a wheel works and keeps trying to build a square cart. You float past a small marketplace now, just waking up. There's a woman selling onions out of a wicker basket. Her feet are bare, her hair braided, her voice sharp as flint when she barters. She doesn't pray aloud, but she wears a little charm on a string, a tiny bronze owl slightly crooked. Maybe it was a gift, maybe it was stolen. Either way, it hangs close to her chest, and she touches it every time she lies about her prices. Athena doesn't judge. Lying, after all, is just creative strategy under pressure. You pass a stonemason humming a tune with no notes. He's chipping away at a slab, carving a lion's paw. His tools are old, his hands steady. He has no idea the technique he's using won't be reinvented for another 800 years in Florence, but Athena knows. She leans over his shoulder, invisible and silent, nodding faintly as he perfects the claw curve. Some fringe scholars argue that Athena might have once been a real person, an ancient architect or priestess whose legacy snowballed into deity status over centuries of oral tradition and poetic exaggeration. Others claim she's an amalgamation of several pre-Hellenic deities. A mashup? A remix? You're just along for the ride, watching as she fixes a cracked column with the gentlest touch of her spear. Further uphill, there's a tiny grove of olive trees. Nothing grand, just 5 or 6 gnarled elders crouched in the soil like old men sharing secrets. The wind sighs through them. A bird chirps once and stops. This is the spot, they say. The place where Athena gifted the olive to humanity, beating Poseidon in one of those classic divine competitions where the stakes are entire cities and the judges are probably bribed. Poseidon gave them a salt spring, which admittedly was pretty underwhelming. Athena, on the other hand, gave them olives. Fruit oil medicine light and flavor, all from one wrinkly bitter tree. And here's the kicker, it grows slowly. Painfully slowly. It takes years to produce anything useful, which makes it the perfect gift from a goddess who sees the long game. You hover above the grove now, where one tree has a twist in its trunk like it's shrugging. The leaves shimmer faintly, maybe from the breeze, maybe from something more divine. It's quiet here, too quiet for tourists. But Athena passes by often, not to check up on things, just to remember. Because when you're the goddess of wisdom, it's not enough to win. You also have to remember why. And so she walks on her sandals, brushing the dirt, her helmet tucked casually under one arm, her mind already reviewing the city's next 10-year plan. No day off. Not even a break. Because there's always one more spark to kindle, one more design to improve, one more question worth answering. And you keep drifting forward in her wake, the warm air thick with the smell of olives, dust and ideas. You trail her through narrow alleys and over tiled rooftops, the city slowly unfolding beneath your weightless feet. Athena doesn't slow down, not even a little. She moves like someone who knows the route blindfolded, because she probably does. You slip past laundry lines strung between terraces and low walls, tunics and chitons swaying like sleepy flags. Somewhere a rooster misjudges the hour and calls too early, causing a dog to bark, which sets off a chain reaction of groggy curses from half-awake neighbors. Athena ignores all of it. Her eyes are fixed on the rising Acropolis. That's where she's headed next. The High City. If you've never seen it before, it hits like a storybook illustration out of proportion, impossibly perched, as if sketched by a daydreaming god. Which, well, maybe it was. The stone gleams pale and pink in the early light, and from here you can see where scaffolding has been wrapped around a half-finished column. Work has stopped for the moment, but the goddess of strategy is already up there pacing. And she is pacing. Not like a stressed mortal, no wringing of hands or muttered complaints. This is the pacing of a mind moving faster than time itself. She's calculating slope angles, wind resistance, troop movements, festival routes, and probably olive oil supply chains all in a single pass. A lot of people forget that Athena also managed logistics for festivals. You think Dionysus got that wine parade together by himself? Please. That man can barely remember which sandal he's wearing. Athena was the one who organized vendors, made sure the musicians showed up sober, or at least in tune, and handled sanitation details, so no one died of sewer runoff before the chariot races even began. Some fringe historians even suggest that Athens' real power didn't come from its navy or democracy, it came from how well Athena managed paperwork. And not metaphorical paperwork. Literal paperwork, clay tablets, papyrus scrolls, census counts, inventories. You drift now into one of those lesser-known corners of the Acropolis, a record room technically. No sculptures here, no grand columns, just rows of clay tablets stacked and sorted with terrifying efficiency. One has a thumbprint pressed into the corner like the person who made it wanted to leave a mark intentionally or not. You imagine Athena walking through this space, running a finger across the spines of scrolls' eyes, scanning for errors, like a divine librarian. It's oddly comforting, isn't it? That even gods need a filing system. And while she's here, you can feel something shift, a tension in the marble, a slight breeze though the doors are shut. She's thinking about war again. Not because she likes it, but because someone has to. The city's growing, which means it's becoming a target. There are whispers of pirates along the coast, rumors of rival city-states eyeing their grain. Athena closes her eyes and mentally places every soldier where they need to be. This is the kind of war planning she excels at, the preventative kind. Build the walls high. Position the archers where the sun won't blind them. Teach the kids how to ration bread. It's not glorious, but it works. Glory was always more Ares' thing anyway. The contrast between the two couldn't be sharper. Ares charges headfirst into chaos with a maniac grin. Athena sets up 10 tripwires and waits in the shadows. He's brawn, she's brain. He starts fires, she builds fire breaks. He sulks when people don't worship him enough. She shrugs and goes back to work. Historians still argue whether their rivalry was sibling-based, as both were children of Zeus, or symbolic, embodying two entirely different philosophies of war. But you can feel the truth here. Athena simply doesn't have time to sulk. She's got columns to straighten. As she leaves the records room, you follow her down a spiral staircase carved into the rock itself. It's cool here. Damp, almost. There's moss on the walls, which she doesn't seem to mind. A few torch sconces line the path, unlit, but ready. She doesn't need the light. She's walked this path 1,000 times in dreams and plans and slow, silent mornings like this one. At the bottom, you step into an open courtyard. It's empty, save for a bronze statue of Athena herself, life-size, perfectly balanced spear, raised just slightly. You might wonder if that feels weird for her standing in front of herself. But no, Athena sees this kind of thing as motivational signage, branding, a reminder of what's at stake. You glance back at the statue. It's aged just a little bronze, turning green at the joints. And yet, somehow, it looks more alive than ever, like it could move if it really wanted to. A trick of the light, maybe. Or maybe not. The goddess looks up at the sky. Clouds are gathering. Not storm clouds, just the kind that means someone somewhere is about to do something stupid that will inevitably become her problem. Again. You wonder if she ever resents it. The constant vigilance. The eternal responsibility. But no, she wouldn't waste time on resentment. That's messy, inefficient. Instead, she reroutes that energy into new projects. Take the helmet she's wearing now, for example. It's not just for show. Historians believe ancient Greek helmets were often designed for more than protection. They were also meant to intimidate, to dehumanize the wearer. Athena took that idea and upgraded it. Her helmet enhances perception, filters out lies, even whispers, tactical suggestions on a bad day. She once lent it to Perseus to fight Medusa, but honestly, she hated parting with it. Not because she feared for its safety, because she missed the input. You watch as she adjusts it slightly, tilting the visor back just enough to let a breeze cool her brow. She closes her eyes, and for a moment, you wonder if she's resting. But no, she's reviewing maritime trade routes in her head. You follow her footsteps down the marble steps, leading away from the courtyard, where morning light begins to spill between columns and cast long, sleepy shadows. Athena pauses just for a heartbeat at the threshold where temple meets air. Her sandals press softly into the stone, and from this high perch you get a full view of the city sprawling outward like a tapestry being slowly unrolled by invisible hands. The agora is waking up below. You hear faint laughter early haggling the creak of cartwheels. Athena hears it all too, but she's listening for something else, something quieter. The tremble of hesitation in a soldier's breath, the subtle falter of a statesman preparing a lie, the rustle of a scroll someone meant to keep hidden. Athena never took a day off because her work wasn't just out in the open, it was everywhere. Every whispered plot, every unguarded thought, every stupid little decision with massive consequences, usually involving goats. She descends with a steadiness that makes you wonder if stairs were her invention. Probably not, but if they were, they'd definitely be straighter, safer, and wouldn't collect so many pebbles. At the bottom, she cuts through the public square without slowing. You pass vendors still arranging their wares, figs, olives, painted pottery and fish that no one's quite sure is fresh. Children run past with reeds in their hands, making whooshing sounds like their swords. One of them trips in front of Athena, and she catches him by the tunic before he can land face first in a tomato pile. She doesn't smile. She nods. He sprints away wide-eyed. He'll probably dream of her for weeks. The agora smells of thyme and charcoal smoke, and here's where she veers off from the main street down a side alley you wouldn't notice unless you knew it was there. The kind of path that seems boring, maybe even forgotten, which is exactly why Athena uses it. This alley leads to a school, not a fancy one. No marble columns or gilded inscriptions, just a simple open-air space with chalkboards and benches made from sawn logs. The students already seated in rough semicircles blink at her like they weren't expecting a divine audit today. She sits, not in the center but slightly off to the side, observing. You wonder if she taught here once. Some say she invented math. Others argue she just encouraged it, nudging humans towards structured thought because chaos bored her. But she definitely had opinions about the curriculum. This school teaches more than reading. It teaches memory, logic, the ability to win arguments without raising one's voice or sword. Athena's favorite kind of victory. A student recites the Iliad from memory, his voice cracking slightly. Athena listens, not just to the words, but to the cadence, the flow, the mistakes. When he stumbles, she raises a finger, not as punishment, but as calibration. She's fine-tuning him. A whispered myth says Athena once tried to teach a class entirely through gestures. No voice, just eye contact, hand signals, posture. The students passed every test, except the final one, humility. Historians still argue whether this method was metaphorical, mystical, or just the result of a week where she had a sore throat. She rises now and walks along the rows, the back of her hand trailing lightly across shoulders, heads bowed instinctively as she passes. She doesn't say much, doesn't need to. You get the sense her silence speaks louder than thunder, a lesson in restraint, in the power of quiet conviction. Outside, a dog barks again. A vendor drops a basket. Somewhere a rooster remembers it's been up since 4 a.m. and screams in protest. Athena sighs. She's not exasperated. Not exactly. It's just everything is so fragile, and humans are so distractible. One bad harvest and the city panics. One whisper of plague and they start burning herbs and accusing their neighbors. Athena has to think 12 steps ahead, not just in war, but in mood, in superstition, in faith. She slips away from the school and back into the folds of the city. This time you find yourself drawn to the temples. Not hers, she rarely lingers at her own altar, but others. She stops at a shrine to Apollo, brushing ash from the corner of a sun disk, then one to Demeter, where a few early stalks of barley have been left in offering. She checks the freshness, nods approvingly. There's something deeply strategic in her route. You realize she's not praying, she's surveying. These shrines are like pressure points across the city. Each one tells her something. About morale, about the grain supply, about which God might be feeling moody and therefore cause a landslide out of sheer divine sulking. And she respects them all, even Dionysus. Well, most days, because it's all part of the balance. Athena isn't queen of the gods. She's not even queen of Athens, but she's the backbone, the invisible line that keeps everything upright. Without her, this delicate mess of rituals and markets and gods and goats would collapse like a poorly tied sandal. She rounds a final corner and you arrive at the workshop. Now this is her church. It's quiet, save for the gentle clink of metal and the whisper of weaving looms. Inside, a half-dozen craftspeople labor over shields, helmets, tapestries. None look up when she enters. They don't need to. They know she's there. One adjusts their grip on a hammer, another smooths out a pattern in a bolt of wool. You realize something. This is why Athena never took a day off. Because this is worship. Not incense or chants or blood sacrifices, but work. Thoughtful, beautiful work. Creation paired with function. Hands that build rather than break. That's what she protects. That's what she wakes for. You watch her pause beside a weaver. The pattern is half done, a scene from a recent festival, children dancing in a circle, olive branches overhead. Athena studies it, tilts her head, and without a word lifts one hand to adjust a single thread. Barely anything. A shade's shift, a line's curve, but it changes everything. She steps back. The weaver nods eyes wide with a quiet sort of awe, and then without ceremony, Athena walks out again. Still not a smile, but maybe, just maybe, a flicker of pride. You catch up to her near the city's outer edge, where Athens begins to fray into farmland and wild olive groves. It's quieter here, less marble, more dust. The kind of place where even the birds think twice before breaking the stillness. Athena slows her pace, the wind tugging gently at the hem of her indigo chiton, and you feel the shift in energy. She's not watching the people now. She's watching the land. Athens wasn't always hers, you know. There was a time when this city, with all its gossiping elders and slippery fishmongers, stood poised to worship Poseidon instead. The sea god had offered salt water and horses, both undeniably useful, but Athena, clever as ever, offered an olive tree. Simple, silent, rooted. That choice echoes through everything. This city, this culture, it became hers, not because she roared louder, but because she promised sustenance, peace, and longevity. And let's face it, horses don't do much for dipping bread. She kneels beside an ancient olive tree, now one of the first planted, legend says, by her own hand. Its bark is rough as old leather, its leaves silver green and whispery. She touches its base gently, the way you'd press a finger to an aging friend's wrist, checking for a steady pulse. Still alive, still growing, still sacred. Nearby, a few farmers notice her. They don't rush to her or prostrate themselves. They simply nod respectfully, cautiously, because Athena isn't the kind of goddess who needs applause. She sees more in a quiet nod than a parade. One man lifts a clay jug in a half salute before returning to his vines. A woman smooths her scarf and straightens her back as if her posture might reflect her piety. Athena walks among them, not floating, walking. Dust clings to the bottom of her robe and a twig snags against her belt. She doesn't bother brushing it away. Why would she? This is part of it, part of the reason she never rests. The people she protects aren't marble statues. They're tired farmers, cranky traders, lovers in messy quarrels, children who still believe thunder means the gods are bowling. You trail her as she moves to a small granary. Inside, it's dim and warm, the air thick with the smell of wheat and something just slightly mouldy. A young clerk glances up from his ledgers, eyes wide. Athena doesn't speak, just looks. A single glance at the scrolls, at the uneven stacks, at the subtle mold creeping up one corner. Her eyes say, "You know better." His expression says, "Yes, I do. This is the work." Not lightning bolts, not monsters, not epic battles with choreographed spear throws and choral backing. This, inventory, food supply, moral example. Because without grain, you don't get cities. Without cities, you don't get ideas. And without ideas, well, you're just a bunch of tired humans yelling at goats again. Athena steps back outside. The sunlight is lower now, softer. It glances off her helmet, still perched atop her head, like it's been there all day, which it has, and catches the faint shimmer of a golden plume. It's more ceremonial than functional, but it sends a message: readiness. She's always prepared. Even here among bees and barley. You walk behind her into a grove just beyond the granary. There an old man plays a lyre. His fingers are crooked with age, his voice thin and weathered. But the song, the song, carries something ancient in its bones. A hymn, maybe. Or just a memory with a tune attached. Athena listens. Not with indulgence. With focus. Music, after all, was never just art to her. It was order. Ratio. The math of the soul dressed in sound. Some fringe thinkers once claimed Athena invented rhythm itself, that before her people just banged rocks together with the enthusiasm of caffeinated squirrels. Others believe she gave humans metronomes in their dreams, those gentle tick-tocks we follow when we breathe, march, sleep. Historians still argue whether the myth of her teaching harmony to Orpheus is symbolic or just a case of too many stories blending in the retelling. But the idea remains where there's structure, Athena lingers. You watch her leave a coin at the musician's feet. She says nothing. The old man nods. Once, then returns to his playing eyes closed, now the notes rising like morning mist. The sun keeps sinking, painting the horizon in honey and rust. Athena turns her gaze to the mountains. You can tell her mind is already shifting forward. She never stops strategizing, not just about wars or city laws, but about culture, narrative, the long, slow shaping of civilization. It's not enough for a city to survive. It has to grow with grace. Otherwise it crumbles with noise. She starts walking again, this time up a narrow path, rocky and steep. You follow, breathing hard. She doesn't. At the top, there's a clearing. Wind brushes past, smelling of thyme and dust. And there, on a flat stone, is a small game board. You blink. It's a grid carved into rock. Pebbles and bone tokens scattered across it. An unfinished game. Athena kneels beside it and studies the pieces. Moves 1. You recognize the look in her eyes. Amusement. Strategy play and war all live in the same house. She resets the game board, because even the goddess of wisdom needs reminders of pattern, of risk, of the power of small choices. A single piece nudged left or right could mean famine or victory. A single day of rest could mean missing the moment where it all begins to unravel. She doesn't take that chance. She can't. So she doesn't. By now, the skies begun to darken, not with the threat of storm, but with the quiet descent of evening, a thick velvet curtain drawn slowly over the Athenian hills. You follow Athena down from the ridge past the wild thyme and the bone game board into the soft hum of a city exhaling at dusk. Oil lamps flicker to life one by one, casting long shadows, and the faint smell of smoke and olive oil into the air. You wonder if she ever feels tired, not just in the feet or the shoulders, but in the soul, a kind of tired that seeps into the marrow, the kind you feel when the same problems keep recycling with different hairstyles and slightly trendier sandals. And yet Athena never falters. She doesn't yawn. She doesn't sigh. She simply keeps moving. Tonight she walks toward the agora, not to buy anything, to observe, because the heart of any city isn't in its temples, it's in its gossip. And nowhere is gossip more fragrant than in the marketplace at dusk, where the fishmongers argue over imaginary prices and old philosophers nurse olives like their ancient wounds. You pass a group of schoolboys flinging nutshells at each other. A man selling charms carved from driftwood swears one of them wards off bad dreams, and a tired woman with a basket of bread stares into the distance like she's contemplating turning into a bird and flying off. Athena watches them all, not with judgment, but with responsibility. She knows that a city isn't built on columns and law codes. It's built on people just trying to make it to bedtime without starting a civil war in their own kitchens. She stops near a vendor selling scrolls, some legitimate others, copied in a rush by someone with very slippery handwriting. A parchment catches her eye, a crude diagram of the human body, labeled with what you can only assume are educated guesses. One even points to the liver and reads seat of love. Fringe theory, definitely. But oddly enough, some ancient doctors did think emotions came from the liver or spleen. One particularly enthusiastic physician claimed the gallbladder held all rage, which would explain why your Uncle Gerald always had indigestion and unresolved anger issues. Athena smiles at the parchment, not mockingly. She respects the effort, because inquiry matters even when it's wildly off base. Better to wonder wrongly than not wonder at all. She gently tucks the scroll back into place, brushing off a little soot. The scroll seller, unaware of who just audited their inventory, continues to shout about limited editions and pre-Olympic pricing. Athena moves on. You trail her past a small shrine tucked between two wine shops. It's devoted to Hestia, goddess of the hearth, the one who never left Olympus. You pause, expecting Athena to offer some kind of tribute, but she simply places her hand briefly on the altar's edge, an acknowledgement, not a competition. Not all goddesses need to light the sky on fire. Some just keep the kettle warm. And perhaps that's part of why Athena never really stops. Because she's trying to be both the strategist and the steward, the thinker and the keeper. She's fighting the external battles, yes, but also guarding the internal flame. A pair of orators are arguing just ahead, their voices rising like an impromptu duet of frustration. One's got ink stains all over his fingers and is waving a scroll like a weapon. The other looks like he's been holding that same counter-argument since last Thursday. Athena pauses listening, not because she agrees with either, but because debate in its pure form is sacred to her. Not loudness, not ego, but the clash of ideas like iron sharpening iron. She doesn't interrupt, just watches, evaluates. Later, maybe one of these men will dream of a wiser version of himself, one who listens better. That dream will feel suspiciously Athena-shaped. You veer into a quieter alleyway behind her, lined with clay pots and shuttered windows. A cat darts by, unimpressed with the divine. Somewhere overhead, laundry sways gently tunics and linens, drying in the twilight air like sleepy flags. Athena stops. Her hand brushes the worn stone wall beside her. It's covered in etchings, some vulgar, some poetic, some simply names stacked like graffiti towers. She studies a particularly well-carved owl. Beneath it, someone has scratched, "I'm trying my best." She nods once, because, well, same. The soft clink of sandals on cobblestone follows her as she continues walking, and you notice her begin to glow slightly, just faintly, as if the city's own energy is reflecting back at her. The glow's not flashy, no thunderclaps, just enough to remind you that this isn't just a woman in dusty robes. This is a deity wearing responsibility like armor. She turns a corner and heads toward a public school, not the elite academies, but the basic overcrowded kind where students chew reeds instead of listening, and someone's always drawing something anatomically incorrect on a wax tablet. The teacher is mid-lecture on ethics, quoting bits of Solon with the energy of a man who just wants to get through the day. Athena lingers in the doorway. The students don't see her, but one boy suddenly straightens his spine, lifts his chin, and asks a question that surprises even himself. It's about justice, why it should apply even when no one's watching. The teacher stammers slightly, caught off guard, then recovers. Athena smiles. There it is, the point of all this. Not power, not glory. Just one more young mind thinking clearly, and maybe, just maybe, sleeping better that night. You follow her as she leaves the school and steps into the soft wind of night. Stars begin to wink into being above the rooftops. Somewhere far off, a flute plays a lullaby, and Athena, glowing faintly, turns her gaze back toward the Acropolis. Because rest is not for her. Not yet. The stars above Athens have begun their slow wheel across the night sky, cool and unbothered, as if they've never seen war or paperwork, or the inside of a sweaty courtroom. You, meanwhile, are padding along the nighttime streets, keeping up with Athena as she makes her way toward the edge of the city, toward a place where justice wears a less ceremonial robe. You're heading to the Areopagus. Now, if you've never visited a rocky outcrop at midnight where ancient murder trials were once held. Congratulations, you've lived a blessedly modern life. But here in classical Athens, the Areopagus isn't just a geological feature, it's the High Court. The place where matters of life and death, of right and wrong, of reputation and ruin are decided under the open sky. Tonight it's empty, but Athena stands there anyway. She gazes out at the city spread below her, the rooftops like flattened shadows, the distant glow of hearth fires twinkling like ground-bound stars. And you get the sense she's not looking for something to fix, but something to protect. See, justice is her domain. Not in the smiting sense. She's not here to fling lightning bolts or turn liars into toads. It's subtler than that. Athena's kind of justice is built on clarity, on truth, emerging from the fog of bias, fear, and last-minute bribes. This is the spot, legend says, where Orestes was tried for the murder of his mother. Yes, his mother. Greek families were complicated. He killed her because she killed his father, who had sacrificed their daughter. It's basically the original group therapy horror story, And when Orestes stood trial, it was Athena who cast the deciding vote. He was acquitted, not because she thought matricide was cool, but because she believed in mercy, in progress, in breaking the cycle of vengeance. Historians still argue whether this was a turning point for Greek legal thought or just a particularly well-written myth meant to impress tourists. Athena kneels slightly, brushing her hand along the cool stone of the Areopagus. The marble is slick from years of footsteps, laments, and legal drama. It hums with memory. You can almost hear the echo's voices rising in defense, in accusation, in desperate hope. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. You remember that scroll from earlier, the one with the wildly guessed anatomy? One of its margins had a tiny note. Fairness is not sameness. At the time you thought it was just bad handwriting. Now you wonder if it was a truth meant for this place. In the quiet, a nightbird calls out, slicing the silence. A breeze stirs, lifting the hem of Athena's chiton. She's not here to preside over a case tonight, but you can see her weighing something. Not an individual crime, but the collective balance. The unseen ledger of human attempts at justice, scrawled in invisible ink. Down below, two figures argue in the street over a missing amphora. They're not important in the grand scheme of things, but Athena listens. She always listens. Because the gods aren't impressed by speeches, they're interested in patterns. She turns from the Areopagus and walks toward a quieter district. You follow your footsteps, now muffled in the dust. Here the houses are lower, the roads narrower. The sounds of Athens become more domestic, the creak of a gate, the coo of a pigeon roosting somewhere inconvenient. A child whimpers in sleep, soothed by a lullaby, hummed in a cracked but loving voice. Athena pauses outside one modest home. Inside, a woman teaches her daughter to spin wool even at this hour. The rhythm is slow but steady. Pull, twist, wind, repeat. It's not a grand act. It won't be remembered in song. But this is the kind of labor Athena values most. Not war cries, but quiet competence. And as you watch, the girl fumbles, the wool slips. She sighs, frustrated, but her mother doesn't scold, just gently shows her again. Athena smiles, a true, quiet smile, because justice and wisdom don't start in courts or temples. They start here in the patience between generations, in the way one pair of hands steadies another. Remember the bone game boys from earlier. One of them will grow up to be a clerk. Another will die in a skirmish over land he'll never own. One will become a playwright who gets booed off stage. And just one will teach his daughter to spin wool by lamplight, and that child will whisper her grandmother's lullabies to her own someday. Athena watches because all of it matters, even the failed plays, even the arguments over amphorae. She moves again now toward the edge of the district where potters work by moonlight. The kilns still radiate heat, the clay tiles stacked neatly, like sleepy soldiers waiting to become rooftops. A man sits beside a jug. He just painted an owl, of course. He doesn't know it, but Athena has been his silent patron for years. Every time his hand wobbled and then steadied every time a customer bought a vase, he thought no one would want that was her influence. Not flashy, just steady. And that's the real reason she never takes a day off. Because someone has to be present when the big battles aren't happening, when it's just people trying not to lose their tempers, trying to teach a child to spin, trying to remember the right amount of water to clay. You glance at Athena again. She's kneeling by a shard of broken pottery. She runs her fingers across it. There's a partial inscription to remember. That's it. No name, no date, just that. To remember. And you wonder what that pot once held. Olive oil wine. A secret message, a child's ashes. Athena doesn't tell you. She simply stands and keeps walking. You follow Athena as she glides away from the potter's quarter, her sandals brushing softly against the dust. The moon now hangs like a polished coin above the rooftops, casting silver onto the uneven stones. Somewhere behind you, a rooster crows too early, perhaps confused, perhaps ambitious. Either way, the world doesn't scold him. It simply lets him try again. Tonight you're heading to the olive groves. You wouldn't think a bunch of sleepy trees could hold much narrative weight, but this is no ordinary patch of farmland. These are the sacred groves, the ones believed to have been planted or blessed by Athena herself, the very symbol of peace, patience, and long-term payoff. You duck under a low branch, the leaves whispering secrets overhead. The scent here is sharp and green dust and sap and something older, something like memory. Athena walks among the trees as if checking on old friends, and in a way she is, because the olive tree is her emblem, not just for its usefulness, but for what it represents: time. An olive tree doesn't bear much fruit in its early years. It takes decades to mature, and even then the harvest is small unless it's well tended. It asks for care, for consistency, for people who understand that the reward comes later, much later. Sound familiar? The very first olive tree, myth says, grew from the rock when Athena struck it with her spear. This was during her famous contest with Poseidon to win the city that would later bear her name. Poseidon offered a saltwater spring, or maybe a warhorse, accounts vary, but Athena gave them something practical. Quietly revolutionary. A tree. Historians still argue whether this tale reflects real agricultural developments or just city branding through mythology. Either way, the people chose her. The tree still stands, they say, or at least a descendant of it. Twisted, gnarled, stubborn and wise. Like most old things worth keeping, you pause at the base of one such tree. Athena rests her hand against the trunk. The bark seems to recognize her, or maybe that's just your sleep-deprived imagination. You glance around and notice something curious: small oil lamps tucked into the roots left as offerings. Some still flicker their flames, protected by little clay hoods. Others have gone out, but the waxy scent lingers. You wonder who placed them. A shepherd grateful for a good season, a scholar praying for clarity before an exam, a thief hoping for forgiveness, or at least a distraction Athena doesn't say. She doesn't need to. She kneels and relights one of the extinguished lamps with a breath that smells faintly of laurel and something electric. And in that flickering glow, you remember that olive oil wasn't just salad dressing in ancient Greece. It was light, it was soap, it was anointing, it was wealth, it was war fuel and funeral balm, and the glimmer in a champion's hair. You once read that Olympic athletes would cover themselves in it before competitions, not to be slippery, but as a mark of ritual cleanliness. They'd then scrape it off with a curved tool called a strigil, collecting the scented oil mixed with sweat and dust into small jars. These jars were sold. Yes, sold. Gross, definitely. But people believed the oil of champions held power. Modern sports drinks have nothing on that kind of marketing. Athena walks slowly between the rows, her fingers trailing across leaves. One branch, you notice, bears olives that haven't ripened yet, tiny green ovals stubbornly clinging to the twig. Another branch droops heavy with purple fruit, the skins wrinkled and ready to burst. The whole grove is a timeline, and she walks it every night. Because to Athena, time is not a line, it's a pattern, a spiral. Each season echoes the last, but never quite the same. Just like people, just like cities. You remember that old stone basin from earlier, where she wiped blood off her hands without flinching. She carries that memory into the grove too, because even peace has a cost. Even a tree to grow must split its seed open and push blindly into dark soil. She pauses at a stump. Once there was a tree here, a big one, but something stormfire ignorance cut it down. All that remains now is the jagged base and a ring of weeds. Athena doesn't mourn. She plants her spear in the center of the stump, not aggressively, just firmly, as if to say, we begin again. And in the distance you hear the first cart of the morning bumping along the road. The city is waking up, slowly, like someone remembering a dream just out of reach. The rooster crows again. This time someone yells at it. Athena chuckles. She turns to go, but you linger a moment longer in the grove. The trees are still. The lamps flicker like tired stars. Somewhere an owl hoots once, twice, and then silence. You remember something a teacher once told you: the opposite of war isn't peace, it's creation. Athena, for all her armor and tactical brilliance, isn't the goddess of death. She's the goddess of what comes after, of building, of nurturing, of staying up late to mend something because it's worth saving. She never takes a day off because the world never stops needing to grow, and neither do you. With one last look at the grove, you follow her once more, back toward the city, where the sun is starting to press its pale gold thumb against the edge of the sky. The first rays of morning stretch across the rooftops as you follow Athena through the slowly brightening streets of Athens. Shadows soften stone warms beneath your feet, and the air begins to stir with the sleepy breath of a city remembering itself. Roosters argue across courtyards, and the first shutters creak open with that specific wooden sigh that only comes from centuries of weather and waiting. Athena walks with purpose, but not haste. She doesn't seem to need rest, only rhythm. You're headed now toward the Agora, the city's heart. Not just a marketplace, but a meeting place of minds, merchants, magistrates, and midwives. You've been here before, maybe in another dream, though it was noisier then. By midday, it will buzz with haggling and laughter and heated philosophy. But at this hour, it's a hush before the hymn. Stone benches glisten faintly with dew. A sleepy cat lifts its head from atop a stack of amphorae and eyes you as if to say, "You again." Athena pauses before one of the smaller stoas' columned walkways where scribes and scholars often lingered chewing on olives and ideas. She leans against a column watching as the earliest vendors set up their wares. Olive oil, of course, bread, bronze tools, dried figs, scrolls. A young boy struggles with a crate nearly as wide as he is. Athena doesn't help exactly. She doesn't break the mythic fourth wall, but the breeze seems to catch the edge just enough to tip the crate gently upright. The boy gasps, glances around, then shrugs and continues. You notice she's not wearing her helmet now. Or maybe she never was. It's hard to tell. The line between mortal imagination and divine reality is particularly blurry before breakfast. It's here, amidst the Agora's emerging buzz, that you start to understand another layer of Athena's devotion. See, she's not just the goddess of war and weaving, she's the goddess of civic order, of civilization itself. It's not as flashy as thunderbolts or shape-shifting swans, but it's the glue that holds the whole divine project together. Mainstream historians often credit her with the invention or protection of various useful arts, chariot building, ship design, metalwork, even the first flute, though legend says she tossed that last one away after seeing how silly her face looked while playing it. And yes, that's a real myth. Supposedly she caught her reflection in a stream, frowned and said, "Nope," before flinging the instrument into the reeds. A dryad may have picked it up and passed it to mortals. That's how myths work. Even the gods have moments they'd rather forget. As you drift between the stalls, you notice plaques, inscriptions carved in marble or wood, offering rules and notices. Some are official, others are little acts of citizen creativity. No urinating on the shrine wall. May the gods shame you. Do not haggle with the fig lady. She bites. Historians still argue whether these kinds of notices reflect centralized governance or just a very opinionated public. But one thing's clear. Cities need structure. Someone has to set the tone. And while Zeus throws lightning when he's annoyed, Athena prefers the long game. Persuasion, policy, quiet persistence. You recall that in later myths, especially in Rome, Minerva, her Latin counterpart, was often linked to strategy more than strength, to the wisdom behind decisions. That's the vibe she carries here. She's the one who stays late to clean up after the metaphorical symposium. And someone needs to. After all, how can a city function if its citizens don't share values, or at least sidewalks? A vendor offers you a dried date. You take it. It's chewy and oddly floral, a little gritty. Possibly because everything here contains a little dust from the Acropolis. Sacred dust, you hope. Athena watches the Agora slowly animate. She doesn't micromanage, she observes. You get the feeling she's less interested in controlling people than in setting the conditions for them to thrive. That's her real trick. Creating systems where reason stands a chance. At the edge of the square, a small crowd begins to gather. Not for a market stall, but for a storyteller. An old man with a voice like woven twine sits on a stool and begins to speak. He's telling a tale about wait for it, Athena. It's one of those looped moments. Myth folding in on myth. This version of her contest with Poseidon includes a few extra flourishes. Apparently, he summoned a tidal wave to intimidate the city, while Athena stood firm, unmoved, her eyes reflecting the sea foam without blinking. The crowd loves it. They nod, murmur, drop a few coins into his bowl. Athena doesn't interrupt. She just smiles faintly. You glance around. Morning has arrived. The agora is alive now, too alive maybe for your sleepy state. But Athena shows no signs of fading. She walks away from the storyteller, from the coins and commerce, toward a smaller alley, one lined with vine-covered walls and faint echoes of poetry scratched into plaster. She never takes a day off. Not because she doesn't want to, but because she knows the city doesn't rest. Not really. Even its dreams must be tended. And as the light strengthens and the voices rise, you realize that in this myth, unlike so many others, Athena doesn't demand worship. She inspires participation. She gives humans tools, not chains, systems, not slogans. You trail behind her into the narrowing alley, the scent of rosemary and old ink clinging to the walls. Somewhere ahead, a pigeon coos lazily. Somewhere behind, a philosopher argues about whether chairs are real. You press on. Athena is already turning the next corner. The alley opens into a small courtyard, sun-dappled, walled with pitted limestone and carpeted in a mosaic of mismatched tiles. It feels like a forgotten pocket of Athens, a place even the tour guides would miss, where ivy drapes from the roof in lazy curls and a lazy tortoise sunbathes without judgment. Athena pauses here just for a moment. The stillness is palpable. There's a vine-covered wall where schoolboys have scratched practice letters, some neat, some sprawling, one bold attempt at Socrates' smells. Another reads, "Don't trust owls." You suspect that one didn't age well. Here, away from the civic clamour, Athena folds her arms and exhales. You wonder if gods need silence, the way mortals need sleep, not because it replenishes, but because it clears the fog of purpose. Focus without frenzy. You sit on a worn stone bench. It's cool and slightly damp. Your fingers trace faint grooves left by centuries of other daydreamers. And then Athena begins to speak. Not aloud, not in thunder, but in a kind of intuitive whisper you feel rather than hear, threaded into the space between breath and birdsong. You're seeing something else now, layered over the courtyard, like a dream projected on reality. A younger Athena, mid-forged sleeves, rolled hair tied back, hammer in hand. Her arms are stronger than you imagined. Not bodybuilder strong, just endlessly practiced. The kind of strength that's never flashy, but always there. She's building a bridle, not a weapon, but a tool for taming horses. That's another of her inventions, according to myth, the bit, and bridle that let mortals ride, and direct their famously uncooperative equine friends. It's not glamorous. No Trojan horses here. Just technique. Quiet control. And there's that recurring theme again. Athena doesn't create chaos, she channels it. She doesn't smite the wildness out of things. She teaches people how to work with it. The scene fades, but the idea lingers. In the courtyard's far corner, a faded fresco depicts her gifting olive trees to humankind. This version shows her smiling, surrounded by farmers. One scratches his head at the fruit. Another pokes a branch with a suspicious stick. It's oddly charming. You suspect most of history's great gifts arrived this way. Confused mortals blinking at their luck and muttering, "Okay." But what does it do? Fringe scholars sometimes suggest that Athena's olive tree wasn't a literal act, but symbolic, representing stability, agricultural roots, or economic hope. The tree becomes a metaphor for peace that grows slowly, not lightning fast. A rooted promise, not a flashy miracle. Historians still argue whether Athena's practical legacy tools, crops, crafts, was a reflection of actual Athenian values or an idealized mold the city wished to fit into. Was she the city's heart or just its mirror? You sit with that question. There's something profoundly human in this version of divinity, not untouchable grandeur, but committed participation. She doesn't remove herself from mortal affairs. She folds herself in like a weaver, threading gold into a rough wool cloak. And maybe that's the real reason she never takes a day off. because everything she stands for requires maintenance. Justice. It drifts without attention. Wisdom needs translation. Every generation. Civic pride built from the bottom, up one citizen at a time like small stones paving a giant forum. She's not holding the world up on her shoulders like Atlas. She's walking beside it, nudging, tweaking, adjusting the loom as it spins. You lean back against the sun-warmed wall, eyes half-lidded. Somewhere above, a dove flutters, then settles. And you remember one last little fringe theory you picked up once, maybe in a bookshop that smelled of dust and melted candles. It said Athena wasn't born from Zeus's head, fully grown, not really. That myth was a metaphor. It claimed she was a collective invention, the personified ambition of a city that wanted to believe in rational strength. That she was every wise mother, clever artisan, and brave teacher braided into one figure over time. A folk hero that got upgraded into a deity. No lightning, no snakes, just good ideas polished into legend. That version sits with you, especially here in this half-lit courtyard where the air smells of old olives and the past feels not quite past. Athena glances your way, not with divine fanfare, just a knowing flick of the eye, as if to say, you get it, you do, and maybe that's enough. Because sometimes the greatest myths aren't loud. They don't involve monsters or kings. Sometimes they look like a woman in a tunic brushing ash from her fingers, fixing the hinge on a city's hope. And she's already moving again, stepping lightly through the archway into another narrow street. You rise, you follow. You follow her down a tight street lined with shuttered stalls and pottery shards. A honey vendor's sign creaks in the breeze, though there's no honey left to sell. Just a sticky trail of dried amber near the door and a few bees performing an exhausted search pattern. Athena steps over a cracked amphora like she's been here 1,000 times before. She probably has. You're in the agora, now the ancient marketplace, not during its bustling high-noon chaos, but in a moment of pause. Pre-dawn, maybe, or just metaphorically quiet. Time here doesn't flow in straight lines. In this version of Athens, the market's heart still beats, but softly like it's sleeping. She pauses beside a stall where scraps of dyed wool drape over a tilted frame. Red indigo, and a yellow so bright it looks almost modern. Saffron, maybe. Expensive and delicate, traded from far-off lands where language tastes different in the mouth and calendars follow stars instead of suns. Athena runs a hand over the fabric, thoughtfully like she's remembering something. This is another thing she gave mortals craft. Not just invention, but the daily skill of turning raw materials into something elegant, durable, useful. Spinning, weaving, dyeing, sewing. These weren't hobbies. They were the nervous system of society. An empire doesn't run on oracles and armies alone. It needs tunics, sails, bedrolls, and binding cords. Weaving was infrastructure. And according to myth, no one wove better than Athena. Except, well, one person. Her name, Arachne. You've probably heard of her, the poor mortal girl who challenged a goddess and got turned into a spider for her trouble. A cautionary tale if you like your morals tidy and your deities petty. But here's where it gets interesting. Arachne didn't lose the contest. Not really. In some versions, her tapestry was just as good, maybe better. It was too good. That's what made it dangerous. She wove scenes of the gods behaving badly, love affairs, betrayals, petty squabbles with high body counts. A mirror held up to Olympus, and it wasn't flattering. Athena, upon seeing it, didn't rage immediately. She admired it first. There was a beat long enough to matter when her face softened. But then, myth says, she tore the tapestry to shreds. Historians still argue whether the Arachne myth is an encoded protest, an ancient metaphor for censorship or the power of art to challenge authority. Was Arachne punished for pride, or for telling the truth too well? Either way, Athena's decision in that story feels off-brand. It's harsh, and maybe that's the point. Even gods have contradictions. The myth ends with Arachne transformed 8-legged and eternally weaving in her webbed corner of the world. But you can't help wondering if Athena visits her sometimes. Checks in. not as a gloating victor, but as a colleague, a fellow maker. There's a fringe theory that claims spiders were sacred to Athena before the myth was even written, that they symbolized order from chaos threads drawn into structure. If true, then turning Arachne into a spider wasn't punishment. It was preservation, a kind of twisted honor. You glance around. A spider does hang above the wool stall, suspended in a delicate spiral. Its web gleams faintly in the morning haze, anchored between a chisel and a fig branch. It works silently, patiently, with purpose. Just like her. Athena moves again, and this time she's carrying something, an unfinished thread bundle slung under one arm. The kind you'd take back home to dye again, or re-spin if it's snagged. You wonder if it's metaphorical. Probably. But also maybe not. Because there's a quiet lesson threading itself through all of this perfection isn't the point. Continuity is. Doing the work again better differently. Letting the pattern evolve without needing it to end. A sleepless goddess, a haunted spider, a city that learns, forgets, and relearns. You're not entirely sure when you sat down again, but your legs are tucked beneath you on a sun-warmed step. Athena disappears around a column, and you feel her presence fade but not vanish. Not really. It's like her workshop echoes wherever effort happens. In classrooms, looms, libraries, kitchens. Anywhere something is crafted with care, and somewhere right now a mortal is making something by hand. Maybe it's you. You blink and the marketplace dissolves into shadows. Now you're walking the stone hallways of a school ancient but not crumbling. It smells of ink olive oil and something like warm wax. The floors are uneven but swept clean. There are no modern desks, no fluorescent lights humming overhead. Just a wide table worn smooth by decades of elbows and parchment, and a clay lamp flickering near the corner like a sleepy eye. Athena is already seated, not at the head of the class, but among the students. She's in disguise again, a linen hood drawn loosely over her head, fingers idly tracing the rim of a ceramic inkwell. Beside her, a scroll lies open. The writing is impossibly neat, every letter measured like it was a chess move. This is her other side, the teacher, the strategist, the one who sees knowledge not as a luxury, but as armor. Because in the world of Greek myths, brawn gets all the fanfare, but brains do the heavy lifting. Athena never saw a spear she couldn't outthink. And while Ares charged into battles like a toddler throwing blocks, Athena preferred to win before the first sword was drawn. This school isn't a formal academy. It's more like a tucked-away gathering of minds. Think of it as an early think tank, minus the coffee and PowerPoint slides. You look around. There's a mathematician murmuring to himself, fingers moving over a board of polished pebbles. A young girl sketches battle formations in charcoal beside a shepherd who's somehow solving geometry problems between bites of dried fig. Athena leans over now, and then offering no praise, just better questions. What if the triangle isn't equilateral? What happens if you move the supply line? Why does this myth show the goddess with her eyes closed? She doesn't give answers. She offers friction, the kind that sharpens. You pause at a narrow alcove where a child no older than 10 is copying a passage from a crumbling scroll. You squint. It's Herodotus, or a very early version of him. The child has underlined a phrase, something about a war that could have been avoided. Something about how people prefer stories to facts because they're easier to carry. Athena glances over the child's shoulder, but says nothing. She just presses a palm lightly to the back of their head for a moment, like someone blessing a spark before it becomes a flame. And here's your historical fun fact. In many ancient Greek city-states, education wasn't just for elite boys. Girls from well-off or priestly families were often literate. Some were scribes. Others composed hymns or ran temple accounts. The gender lines weren't always strict, just blurry enough for a clever goddess to slip through. Now, the fringe theory. There's a strange line in a lost text, only fragments survive, that claims Athena taught writing to mortals by accident. That in trying to record a complex set of battle tactics, she simplified symbols until they began to resemble letters. Language as a side effect of strategy. Historians still argue whether that fragment refers to alphabetic writing or older systems like Linear B, but the implication is wild either way, that war and wisdom both evolve through the act of making marks on clay. And those marks, they're everywhere here. On tablets, scrolls, waxboards, even on skin. You pass a man who's tattooed a map across his arm, each village marked by a tiny sigil. He catches you looking and grins. Athena taught me to remember things that matter, he says, so I drew them where I can't forget. She doesn't stop him, doesn't correct him, just lets the story breathe. That's another thing about her. Athena doesn't need to be the center of attention. She just needs the work to continue. This school she's fostering, if you can even call it that, isn't meant to last forever. It's portable, meant to spread. The students aren't being groomed for glory. They're being prepared to ask better questions in their own corners of the world. As you watch a young woman with an armful of scrolls slips out through a back door. She doesn't look back. Another tucks a small abacus into her belt and heads toward the harbor. The knowledge leaves in pieces. Athena is already packing up. She gathers the scrolls with swift precision, as if she knows she'll need them elsewhere, perhaps in Alexandria a few centuries from now, or in a basement study in Renaissance Florence, or behind the eyes of someone scribbling formulas in a cold attic with a leaky roof. She lifts the lamp, and the room stretches long in its soft gold glow. And you wonder how many schools like this has she started. How many times has she handed a child the tools to build a better world? You step outside with her. The street is quiet. Morning is rising again, or maybe it never set. Time is loose here. She doesn't say goodbye, just tilts her head toward you like a coach before the final test, as if to say, you've seen enough. Now go make something of it. You walk a while without her. The air is softer now, and the streets of ancient Greece melt into something grander. Marble halls echoing with sandaled footsteps, vast plazas lined with statues that somehow all resemble someone trying to look more heroic than they actually were. Welcome to Olympus, or at least the version mortals imagined when they weren't too scared to picture it. This is the domain of gods soaring spotless, suspiciously symmetrical. It's oddly quiet for a place that houses divine beings known for petty squabbles and dramatic punishments. But Athena isn't one for noise. You step into a courtyard where columns stretch like disciplined soldiers. Pigeons, probably immortal ones, flap lazily from one cornice to another. The air smells faintly of thyme, bronze polish, and ambrosia, which, if you're curious, is described as sweet, but in a way that probably turns your teeth to pearls. Athena waits here, not with a weapon or scroll this time, but seated before a bronze mirror taller than she is. It doesn't show her reflection. It shows her competitors. Ares, all swagger and oil-slick muscles, practicing a war cry he thinks sounds intimidating. Spoiler, it doesn't. Apollo plucking at his lyre, trying to compose a victory song before the battle's even begun. Hermes, napping with one eye, open his sandals, already pointed toward the nearest exit. Athena watches them like a teacher grading midterms with a red quill dipped in sarcasm. She's tired. Not in the physical sense, you get the feeling gods don't ache like mortals, but in the way someone gets tired of explaining the obvious. Because here's the thing, Athena doesn't stop working, because none of the other gods can be trusted with a group project. They lose interest. They pick favorites. They forget that mortals are watching. She remembers. She always remembers. And here's your historical tidbit to chew on in actual ancient Greek worship. Athena wasn't some fringe deity. She was central. Her cults were organized, her temples enormous, and her priests and priestesses wielded real political clout. Cities aligned themselves with her not just for protection, but for ideology. Athena stood for order, strategy, law, reason. She was the ancient world's version of a constitution wrapped in a helmet. Now, for the weird part, there's a lost papyrus recovered only in fragments that describes an obscure ritual involving the silent mirror of Athena. No one's quite sure what it was. Some say it was used for judicial reflection, literally looking into one's conscience before giving testimony. Others think it was metaphorical, a mirror that showed not what was, but what should be. Historians still argue whether this was ever real or just poetic symbolism, but the idea stuck. Because Athena doesn't just fight wars. She holds up a mirror and dares you to ask why the war started in the first place. And that's exhausting. Imagine being the only immortal in the pantheon who reads the fine print. You pace beside her as gods come and go. They ask for advice, then immediately ignore it. Poseidon grumbles about mortals forgetting to sacrifice sea urchins or something equally obscure. Hera floats past with narrowed eyes, muttering about being misrepresented again in yet another myth. Athena answers no one. She just watches, thinks, plans. You realize she doesn't take a day off because the moment she does the whole game tips sideways. Not in some apocalyptic way, there are plenty of other gods to step in, but in that small, irreversible way where wrong becomes normal, where one lie snowballs into myth, where forgetfulness becomes policy. And she hates that. To her, rest isn't just unproductive, it's irresponsible, which makes her the least relatable goddess at Olympus brunch, but probably the one you'd want proofreading your peace treaty. She stands now and the mirror dims. The courtyard glows with an impossible light, neither sun nor fire. Something older. Athena begins to walk again. You follow her into a chamber where the walls are covered in overlapping maps. Some are old and cracked, showing ancient city-states. Others are eerily modern outlines of nations that haven't been named, yet roads that haven't been paved. She runs her hand along the edge of a future no one else can see, and you finally ask her silently, because you get the sense she prefers it that way, why she doesn't stop, why she keeps teaching, building, planning, watching. She doesn't answer. She just turns to you and gestures to the maps. One finger taps a region that's half formed the lines uncertain. It's a metaphor. Probably. She leaves the room without another glance. You stay for a moment longer, tracing those strange new borders, wondering which are real, which are guesses, and how many of them were drawn with her whispering in the ears of the right minds at the right time. You trail her into darkness. Not metaphorical darkness, the actual torchlit corridors beneath Olympus. You didn't know the gods had basements, but here you are walking through halls lined with clay tablets, sealed jars, scrolls bound with sinew, and bronze masks with unreadable expressions. It smells like beeswax, old parchment, and secrets. Athena walks ahead, torch in hand, as if she's done this 1,000 times. You wouldn't be surprised if she has. Down here, the gods keep the things they don't want seen in marble drafts of destinies, edits to mythologies, blueprints of failed utopias. You wonder how many of these shelves are labeled, "Let's never speak of this again." She stops before a large clay jar. The lid is slightly ajar. You recognize the shape instantly, it's Pandora's. Yes, that Pandora. The original oops of human mythology. Except Athena doesn't look at the jar with fear or reverence. She looks at it like a teacher looks at a half-finished assignment. She removes the lid and peers inside, as if checking whether the damage has worsened. Because here's the thing. Most people think the jar or box, thanks to a translation error that stuck harder than it should have, was simply a container for curses. War, famine, jealousy, reality TV, you name it. But some fringe scholars argue it wasn't a curse repository at all. It was a quarantine vessel, designed to isolate divine concepts too dangerous for everyday worship. Athena may have helped design it, and she definitely checks on it regularly. You creep closer and peek inside. It's empty. Not comfortingly empty. Worryingly empty. The kind of empty that implies everything inside has long since escaped, scattered into history like glitter on carpet. Athena sighs. She replaces the lid and seals it with a strip of wax, marking it with a symbol that doesn't translate cleanly. Part owl, part keyhole, part question mark. Then she moves on, and so do you. This lower level of Olympus is lined with rooms that don't exist anywhere else. One contains a garden of ideas, literally a stone greenhouse where every plant represents a concept. You see thorns blooming into irony, pale mushrooms with the scent of regret, a vine that coils tightly around itself like recursive logic. Athena touches one flower, a silver-petaled thing labelled Hope, and you swear it trembles in her palm. Hope is heavier than people think, she says quietly. It's why it was the last to leave the jar. It's the first time she's spoken since you descended here. You blink, unsure how to respond, so you say the only thing that seems appropriate, but why keep working? Why not let someone else tend the garden? She turns to you then. There's no one else left who knows what each plant means. Oof. Heavy. You follow her into the next room, which contains a pool of still water. It reflects not your face, but moments in history. You see the sacking of cities, the signing of peace treaties, the quiet exchange of knowledge between enemies turned allies. The pool ripples. You see a woman teaching geometry in Alexandria, centuries ahead of her time. You see a council of mothers in a hilltop village deciding how to ration grain. You see a monk painstakingly copying a medical diagram, one droplet of ink away from discovery. Athena kneels beside the pool, watching. She doesn't interfere. She never does, not directly. That's not her way. She nudges. She inspires. She plants the seed of a question in someone's mind and waits to see if they'll water it. You wonder how often she's been disappointed. You wonder how often she's been proud. A curious thing happens now, one of those mainstream historical facts that scholars barely glance at anymore. In several ancient Greek city-states, citizens believed that dreams were not only messages from the gods, but literal visitations. Dream temples existed. You could lie down, fall asleep, and wake up with instructions whispered by divine figures. Athena appeared in more dreams than most. Not shouting, not threatening, just advising. Gently. Historians still argue whether these were religious trances or early forms of therapy. But the pattern remains. Athena didn't demand loyalty. She asked questions, and that in her eyes was the true path to wisdom. You sit beside her now, not saying anything, just watching the water. One scene catches your eye, a young girl refusing to marry, instead retreating to a library. She's scribbling in a stolen notebook. The ink glows faintly. You glance at Athena. She smiles just a little. You think maybe she visits more people than anyone realizes. Not in flaming chariots or thunderclaps, but in quiet moments when a hard decision is made for the right reasons. She stands once more, brushing a bit of ash from her sleeve. You look around at the archive, the garden, the mirror pool. This is her vacation. This is her version of rest. There's something comforting in that. Terrifying maybe, but comforting too. Because while the other gods play politics or chase adoration or bicker over who gets a holiday named after them, Athena just works. Not for praise, not for control, but because she knows someone has to. You return to the surface. Not Olympus proper, not yet the in-between. A hazy plateau where the stars seem closer than the ground and time feels like it's pacing in circles rather than marching forward. Athena doesn't walk beside you now. She's ahead again, always a few steps ahead. You've earned a question, though. So you ask it not out loud, but the way you do in dreams, silently from the chest, shaped more like a feeling than a sentence. Do you ever regret it? She stops walking, doesn't turn around, just looks out into the clouds curling like ink in water. Regret's inefficient, she says. But I do review. It's such a her thing to say it makes you laugh quietly so as not to echo in the fog. But that one word review unlocks another door. A new memory. A very old one. Flashback to the time of the Mycenaeans around 1200 BCE. Bronze blades, Linear B tablets, boar tusk helmets. The kind of stuff that fills museum exhibits nobody reads all the placards for. Athena wasn't yet the household name she'd become. But the ideas that would shape her were already percolating in whispered stories of a war goddess who didn't scream, who didn't bathe in blood, who thought her way through strategy like a musician reading a score. The Greeks were warlike, sure, but also poetic. That paradox was their heartbeat, and Athena, more than any other deity, stood at its crossroads. There's a fringe theory, not widely taught, but oddly persistent, that Athena is actually much older than Olympus. That she's a borrowed goddess, her roots tangled in Libyan or even Minoan religion. A bird goddess, a mother of storms and mathematics, stripped of her feathers and refitted for Greek sensibilities. If true, it explains a lot, like why she never quite fits with the Olympian crowd, why she avoids the feasting halls, why even in moments of triumph there's something distant in her gaze, because maybe she remembers who she was before all this. You drift through another vision now, more recent, relatively speaking. Athens during its so-called Golden Age. Marble columns still white, not yet browned by centuries of rain and revolution. You're standing beside a sculptor. He's halfway through chiseling a likeness of Athena for a temple frieze. Sweat beads on his forehead. He mutters to himself, "Too tall, too perfect, not enough soul." He starts over. That statue will never be finished. He'll die before he gets the proportions right. But the sketch he leaves behind becomes the blueprint for dozens of others, and each one captures something different. Sometimes the sternness, sometimes the serenity, sometimes that fleeting flicker of near smile. Athena isn't one thing. That's what makes her exhausting. She is reason and war and poetry and strategy and motherhood deferred. She is balance in an unbalanced family. She is the constant call to try harder. And she never asks for applause. You find yourself beside a battlefield now, one that historians still debate the name of. It's not in the books, no monuments, just a windswept plain scattered with broken spears and silence. But she's here, not fighting, gathering the wounded, whispering instructions to the medics, binding a sprained ankle, cooling a forehead. You realize with some shock that these aren't soldiers from the same side. She's helping everyone. Athena's not above violence, but she's never drunk on it. This is another truth that gets buried in marble, that strategy isn't just how you win a war, it's how you end one. And that's the part most gods ignore. You move with her now into a quieter corner of time. A study, stone walls, bronze oil lamps, and scrolls organized by topic. Some titles you can read, others are written in alphabets no one uses anymore. She pours tea, not wine, not nectar. Tea. You sip. It tastes like time ink and something vaguely metallic. This is what you do when you rest, you ask. She shrugs. I revise. The room darkens. Not ominously. Just in that gentle candle flicker way when the evening stretches toward tomorrow. You notice a scroll she's left open. It's labeled if-then scenarios, civilizations that almost were. You glimpse a few entries. If the Library of Alexandria hadn't burned, if Hypatia had been allowed to teach freely, if Baghdad's House of Wisdom survived the Mongol siege. Each one is annotated with footnotes, margins, crammed with looping script and owl doodles. Athena has been keeping track, not just of what happened, but of what could have. She's building a syllabus for a world that never quite arrived. You feel it then, the true shape of her weariness. It's not from work, it's from unfinished work. She could stop. She could retreat to some starlit corner of Olympus and sip pomegranate juice while the world burns or rebuilds. But she doesn't. Because for every almost, there's still a maybe. And that's enough. The tea is finished. She rolls up the scroll and stores it in a cubby labeled pending. There are a lot of pending cubbies. You don't ask what's in them. You already know blueprints for a better future. Plans that require patience and time, and maybe one stubborn mortal who reads the right myth at the right moment and decides to start something. Athena stands, adjusts her tunic, and heads for the stairs. You follow slower this time, because you're starting to understand. She doesn't take days off, not because she's divine, but because she's needed, not worshipped, needed. And that's a very different thing. You reach the stairs and follow her into another corridor of memory, a less grand one this time. The walls are rough, carved out of stone with no embellishments. They remind you of a monastery or a tucked-away scriptorium. There's a quiet here, a reverence not for the gods, but for the act of thinking. Athena doesn't speak for a while. She's letting you look. At first glance it seems unremarkable. Clay tablets, brittle scrolls, worn-down styluses. But each object glows faintly, pulsing with the knowledge sealed inside. She lifts one scroll and hands it to you. It's a lesson plan. a literal ancient curriculum from Plato's Academy. The real one, not the version in philosophy textbooks, but the iteration they actually used a mix of rhetoric, ethics, geometry, and what looks suspiciously like instructions for forming a dodgeball team. Or maybe that's a mistranslation. Foundational education, Athena murmurs, is the quietest revolution. That's the moment you realize she's not just a goddess of war and wisdom. She's the guardian of instruction, the silent patron behind every dusty library, every late-night study session, every frustrated scribble in the margins. That time, you stayed up trying to understand calculus. She was probably there, perched somewhere near the ceiling light. You trail your fingers along another artifact, a chunk of blackened parchment inscribed in Phoenician script. It doesn't matter if you can read it. The ink hums with purpose. A shopping list, a prayer, a poem you'll never know. But Athena's preserved it anyway, because someone once thought it was worth writing down. Historians still argue whether Athena truly belonged to the domain of literacy. After all, Hermes was the messenger and Apollo the poet. But those roles were performative. Athena was something else, the editor, the teacher, the one who lingered after class to explain the metaphor. She didn't invent wisdom, she standardized it. You step into a new room, more modern, startlingly so. Mid-19th century, maybe. The air smells like ink and wool. There's a printing press in one corner, and a girl in a severe brown dress bent over a desk, her fingers smudged with graphite. Athena's here too. Not in full armor, but in a plain scholar's robe, her hair tied back her face, half lit by a desk lamp. She's watching the girl write, not guiding her hand, just watching like a quiet coach from the sidelines. You read over the girl's shoulder. It's a manifesto, carefully worded, fiercely argued, and dangerously illegal in its time. It calls for something simple, the right to think out loud without punishment. The name at the bottom is unfamiliar. History won't remember her. But Athena does. You don't speak, you just nod. Because this is what no temple carving ever captured Athena, the protector of the unremarkable brilliant, the unglamorous genius, the ones who never make statues or coins but change things anyway. She moves again, and you follow her this time through a hallway that seems to stretch across centuries. Flickering snapshots line the walls, Galileo sketching moon phases, Ada Lovelace scribbling code. Before code was a thing, Wang Zhenyi calculating eclipses by candlelight, Frederick Douglass learning to read in secret, every face framed in soft gold. You ask her, do they know you're there? Athena tilts her head, then shrugs. Some of them. But it doesn't matter. My job isn't to be seen. It's to notice. There's another debate scholars love to have, whether Athena became obsolete in modern times. With science, reason, and critical thinking ascending, did humanity outgrow its need for a wisdom goddess? But those who say that underestimate just how fragile wisdom is. Not intelligence, not data, wisdom. The ability to apply what we know with balance, foresight, and humanity. And that Athena reminds you is always under siege. You step out onto a balcony now, high above a world you half recognize. It's your world, but softened like the dream version of your own street. Lamplight flickers. Somewhere a dog barks softly. A radio plays a forgotten jazz tune. Athena stands beside you, leaning slightly on the railing. She sighs, and for once it's not made of marble or metaphor. It's just a tired breath. You wonder if she ever rests. If there's a version of this story where she sleeps just once for the length of a mortal night. No, she says, reading your thought, but sometimes I pause. She smiles not wide, but real. And then very gently she gestures behind you. You turn and the corridor is gone. You're in your own room again. Familiar walls, familiar bed, familiar creaks in the ceiling. The only difference is the owl on the windowsill blinking at you like it knows every book you've ever read. Athena is already fading from view, but before she disappears completely, you hear her voice low, amused, a whisper inside your mind. Keep learning, it annoys the others. The owl stays for a while, blinking slowly in the moonlight, as if to confirm, yes, that really happened, or something like it. You exhale and sit quietly, letting the silence settle, letting your heart slow. But the story isn't quite finished yet. Athena, remember, never takes a day off. And you're not done walking the corridors of her world. You blink once more, and your room dissolves again, not into ruins or palaces this time, but into a tent. A worn canvas tent flapping gently in a desert breeze. You smell leather dust parchment ink and the faintest trace of rosewater. It's not Greece now. You're in North Africa, Alexandria perhaps, or Carthage. The air is dry but soft, like sand sifting between thoughts. Inside the tent, a woman crouches beside a scroll, speaking softly to a small crowd. Her eyes are bright, her hands restless. She's explaining planetary motion using stones and string. Most of her audience doesn't understand. Some aren't even listening, but Athena's perched above half-shadow, wholly present. It's another thread in the tapestry. Another classroom. Athena flickers now, not in marble temples, but in whispered salons, underground libraries, pirated PDFs, after-school tutoring sessions, late-night Wikipedia rabbit holes. She's adapted, as she always has. Wherever there is someone trying, truly, trying to understand this absurd world a little better, she shows up. You sit quietly cross-legged on the tent floor, watching. No one notices you. But the woman glances up once, mid-sentence, and her gaze passes over where Athena stands. A tiny nod. And then the tent fades again. You're in a busy 18th century kitchen now. Pots clang. A boy kneads dough in a corner. But in the far room, through a cracked door, a girl scribbles furiously into a journal. Her dress is singed at the sleeve. Her cheeks are red from cooking fires, but the equations on the page are crisp and precise. You can't make out the symbols. They aren't meant for you. They're hers and hers alone. Athena sits beside her on a stool, balancing a feather quill between two fingers, watching the girl struggle and solve and sigh. Historians still argue whether wisdom ever belonged to women at all in these stories, whether it was ever safe to speak ideas aloud without hiding behind a man's name or a false identity. But Athena never cared about that kind of permission. She's never needed it. She's where the work is, even when the world isn't watching. Back in the corridor, yes, we're returning now. You walk past a set of frescoes. They ripple with scenes that feel oddly familiar. A protester in a square holding up a sign no one understands yet. A boy hacking a machine apart to learn how it works. A woman in a white coat arguing with colleagues in a language made entirely of formulas. These are today's classrooms, today's arenas. Athena's still busy, and you've been watching long enough to see the pattern. She doesn't fight her battles in obvious ways. Her wars aren't waged with spears and siege engines. They're fought in small, steady repetitions, turning the page, asking the question, showing up again, even after you failed. It's hard to say where her domain ends. Certainly not with ancient Athens. Not even with the Renaissance. Maybe it never ended at all. Maybe she simply shape-shifted into every book spine, every student desk, every overly ambitious science fair project. There's one more room you haven't seen yet. Athena leads you through it quietly, like a final lap around the labyrinth. This one is empty. Mostly. It's a wide hall with polished floors and high arched windows. Light streams in. There's a podium in the center. And on that podium, a single object, a clay figurine crudely shaped. Barely recognizable. You approach and peer down. It's her. A tiny, child-made sculpture of Athena. The helmet is crooked. The shield's just a lopsided disc. But it's clearly her made by someone who once saw her in a book or imagined her whole. That she says softly was made by a girl in 300 BCE. She lived in a fishing village and never learned to write, but she tried to remember my shape. That's all I ask. And now it's time. The hallway is darkening again, not ominously, just gently, like a museum closing for the night. The windows dim. The doors whisper closed behind you. Athena stands beside you one last time, her gaze fixed somewhere far beyond anything you can see. Don't worry, she says. I'm not going anywhere. She lifts one hand, not to wave, but to bless. and in the softest hush, her armor dissolves into light. You're back in your bed now, the blankets curled around you like myths still unfolding, the owl's gone from the windowsill, but you know without needing proof that she's still there, somewhere, in someone's messy notes, in someone's late-night studying, in someone's handmade drawing of a goddess who never stopped working. You don't move right away. You're still listening, half expecting the clink of her shield in the hallway, the faint scent of olive oil and old parchment. But the night is quiet now, softer. No more footsteps echoing down marble corridors, no more flickers of divine light. Still, something lingers. Not Athena herself, perhaps, but the aftertaste of her presence, like static in the air before a storm, like the way you sometimes wake up knowing something you didn't know before, because even gods leave fingerprints, especially the ones who never rest. Tonight, we're moving again, backwards this time, through time, through stories, through centuries of reimaginings and revisions, because it turns out no myth stays still. And Athena, she's been rewritten more times than you've hit. Remind me later on a software update. You find yourself standing now in a quiet, dusty room somewhere in 5th century Constantinople. There's a scholar here copying manuscripts by candlelight. His fingers are stained with ink. His lips silently mouth the lines. He's debating something, whether to include a certain passage about Athena in his next scroll. Not the old war stories, not the gory ones. A minor myth, one where she helps a boy solve a geometry puzzle and then disappears. He hesitates. Is that even worth copying? Athena watches from the doorway. He copies it anyway. Centuries later, a scribe in Baghdad will read that same scroll, preserved and translated. He won't know her name, only the idea. A helper, a figure of clarity. He'll sketch her in the margins, no helmet, no owl. Just a pair of eyes always open. Historians still argue whether myths lose their meaning when they travel. Whether a Greek goddess can survive translation into Arabic, then Latin, then English, then TikTok memes. But that's the wrong question. The better question is, why do we keep bringing her back? You leave the dusty room and the world rearranges around you. Now, you're under the stars again, this time in a 10th century Chinese observatory. It's winter. The sky is painfully clear. A woman sits on the cold stone platform, mapping constellations. Her fingers are blue with cold. She murmurs calculations, drawing connections between stars, like stitching thread through the cosmos. There's no Athena here, not explicitly. But the same hunger burns in the woman's eyes, the need to know. And from the shadows, a faint glimmer of gold. Maybe a trick of the starlight, maybe not. It's a reminder Athena isn't only Greek. She's an idea that slips past borders. Every culture has her in some form, a goddess, a muse, a whisper, in a scientist's ear, a scribbled diagram that just might change everything. You pass through more rooms, a Renaissance painting studio where a woman disguised as her brother signs her name to a geometry treatise, a tiny African schoolroom where students chant multiplication tables beside goats, a colonial American kitchen where a girl reads by firelight while her family sleeps. Athena's in all of them, or someone like her. And you're starting to see how she works, not with lightning bolts or dramatic speeches, but with stubbornness, with repetition, with a refusal to let the pursuit of knowledge become a footnote. You reach a modern classroom now, bare walls, flickering lights, a broken projector. A tired teacher flips through a textbook, sighs and starts again. At the back of the room, a student doodles a warrior woman in the margins of her worksheet, complete with owl helmet and scowl. The teacher doesn't notice, but the doodle stays. You sit beside it for a while. The paper crinkles softly. A breeze shifts the blinds. Outside, traffic murmurs like ancient seas. And then it clicks. Maybe the real reason Athena never takes a day off is that you don't either. Not really. Not deep down. Even when you're tired. Even when the world feels like a very elaborate group project gone horribly wrong, you still show up. You still ask questions. You still try to make sense of it all in your own way. Athena would approve. She might not say it. She's not big on pep talks, but she'd give you that tiny nod, the one that says, keep going. You move again now slower, like a tide going out. You're drifting through libraries now, empty ones, full ones, burned ones, rebuilt ones, some stacked with scrolls, others with e-readers and late fees. In all of them, Athena lingers near the quietest shelves, the corners no one dusts, the places where knowledge hides in plain sight. She isn't glamorous here, but she's there, in a handwritten index card, in a typo corrected by a sleepy student, in a poem stuffed between two science books and forgotten, everywhere and nowhere. That's the trick, because the gods don't stay still. They evolve. They hitch rides on human effort, on belief, on boredom, on obsession, on late-night research rabbit holes about why owls can rotate their heads 270 degrees. Athena doesn't need temples anymore. She has you. You blink slowly. The libraries melt into fog, and the silence grows softer still, like pages being turned somewhere in the distance, like chalk dust settling. You're not exactly awake anymore, but you're not asleep either. You're drifting gently like a thought that never quite finishes forming, and yet there's still more. Because for someone who never took a day off, Athena's post-retirement portfolio is surprisingly robust. She may not thunder across battlefields anymore, but her afterlife is alive and well in marble statues, academic conferences, college mascots, and fantasy video games. You find yourself now standing in front of a university building, somewhere vaguely ivy-covered. A statue of Athena perches above the main archway spear, tucked-in owl at her shoulder gaze, fixed on some distant syllabus. Students shuffle past beneath her headphones in deadlines looming. Some notice her. Most don't, but she watches all the same. Historians still argue whether these modern nods to ancient gods mean anything, whether a bronze statue on a campus lawn is tribute or just tradition, whether invoking Athena's name on academic seals and bookplates is reverence or aesthetic laziness. But maybe the answer is simpler. Maybe it's inertia, or memory, or just the fact that some ideas are too stubborn to die. Inside a lecture is wrapping up. You hover near the ceiling, unseen. The professor is winding down a 2-hour dive into Athenian democracy, gesturing at slides, quoting Thucydides, cracking a few jokes that only 3 people laugh at. One student is fully asleep, another's doom-scrolling. A third is sketching a comic strip where Athena runs for local office and defeats Apollo in a public debate using nothing but logic and eye contact. You approve. The class ends. The lights go out. The projector hums into silence. And yet, as the students leave, something lingers in the air, something like curiosity, something like respect. Athena was never the warmest goddess, never the most relatable. She didn't fall in love or turn into a swan or get tricked into swallowing her own rage. She was always apart, always armored, always working. And maybe that's why she stuck around. You float out the door and find yourself in Athens again, not ancient this time, but now. Present day. The Acropolis looms above, part ruin, part icon. Tourists pose for selfies. Vendors sell gyros and keychains. A dog naps in the shade. You step carefully around the scaffolding. Archaeologists are restoring part of the Parthenon, picking through stones, aligning fragments, brushing off centuries of dust. None of them say her name out loud, but they're building a temple to her all the same, because that's what restoration is. That's what research is. That's what memory is, a kind of worship. You walk along a quiet path now out of the city into the hills. The sun is setting. The sky is a slow burn of saffron and lavender. Birds circle in lazy spirals. Somewhere in the distance, a goat bleats without urgency. You sit on a rock. Let the warmth seep in. You think about all the versions of Athena that have walked through this story. The one born from a headache. The one who turned weavers into spiders. The one who gave mortals the olive tree, invented the flute, solved ancient land disputes, and helped Odysseus out of at least 6 different death traps. The one who never blinked. And now she's quiet. But not gone. Because here's the truth of it. Something the myths don't always say. Even gods get tired, but they don't stop. They become other things, symbols, motifs, inspiration at 3 a.m. when you're trying to fix a sentence or solve a math problem or figure out why your Wi-Fi only breaks during Zoom calls. They wait in quiet moments, in stubbornness, in focus, in you. You close your eyes. The sun warms your eyelids. The breeze smells faintly of thyme and old books. Athena's spear is laid down for now, her helmet set aside, but the owl still flies. And you keep walking, because like her, you're still asking questions, still chasing clarity, still showing up. You never took a day off either. And maybe that's what keeps the world turning. Not thunderbolts or divine pronouncements, not fate or prophecy or ancient grudges, just quiet persistence. Your steps slow, the light fades, the air grows cooler, softer, wrapping itself around you like a well-worn cloak. You walk now not in a myth or a library or a battlefield, but somewhere between waking and sleep. Somewhere where gods whisper and owls glide on silent wings, where memory drips like honey from the edge of a dream. And in this liminal dusk, Athena stays with you still. Maybe not in armor, maybe not perched on a cloud dictating divine policies, but in the quiet logic of your thoughts, in the way your fingers trace patterns when you're trying to think, in the quiet certainty that something can always be learned if you're willing to listen. You find yourself beside a stream now, gentle meandering, glinting under the stars. The world feels ancient and young all at once, a mosaic of sound, the distant bleat of sheep, the whisper of grass, the soft chirp of crickets like 1,000 tiny timekeepers, reminding you that the night moves slowly but always forward. There's no temple here, no stone columns or sacred inscriptions. But if you tilt your head just right, the trees overhead form arches. The moss beneath your feet feels like an altar, and the stars they've been watching since long before Athens ever laid her first stone. Historians still argue whether the gods ever truly left or whether we simply stopped noticing them. Whether myths were once truths or whether they were always metaphors, trying to explain the things we couldn't quite pin down. Things like love and rage and wisdom and the nagging feeling that someone is watching over your shoulder when you're trying to get your act together. Fringe scholars point out that Athena shows up again and again in dreams, not as a goddess, but as a figure in grey, a voice offering practical advice in the middle of chaos, not comforting, but useful, realistic, ready with a plan, because that's always been her role. She wasn't the one to weep with you or to fight your battles for you. She was the one who reminded you where you left your sword, or your laptop charger, or your conviction. And maybe that's even more comforting. You lean back now. Let the ground cradle your spine. Let the stars fill your vision. You imagine them like eyes, watchful, unblinking, filled with curiosity. Athena's eyes. There's a reason owls are nocturnal, a reason her gaze never falters. While other gods feasted or frolicked or flamed out in poetic tragedy, she was working, studying, making things better or at least less disastrous. Not flashy, but consistent, just like you've been tonight. Sticking with the story, following the threads, asking questions, holding space. You've made it through war and weaving contests, golden apples and bronze-tipped arrows, shadowy libraries and thunderous debates. And all along, Athena never took a day off, and neither did you. But now you can rest. You've earned it. The fire's embers are low, the owl's wings are folded, the myths have quieted. And though there may always be more to learn, some unresolved debate, some hidden scroll, some long-lost version of the story, where everything ends differently for tonight, the tale is complete. The goddess is still watching, but she won't mind if you finally close your eyes. Wind down approx. 300 words, now let everything soften. Let your thoughts slow to a whisper, like distant footsteps fading into the dusk. Your breath deepens. Your limbs grow heavy. The story unwinds behind you, thread by thread like a tapestry being gently folded and stored away until morning. You are safe. You are still. The night stretches around you like velvet, cool, quiet, comforting. The embers glow somewhere just out of sight, not to warn, not to guard, but simply to be a warm presence in the dark. And Athena, she's there too, not as a towering goddess in bronze, but as a gentle nudge in your mind, reminding you that you're clever, capable, resilient, that you don't need to win every battle tonight. That resting is its own kind of wisdom. You've walked through myths and marble, through wars and weaving looms, and you've come out the other side, quieter maybe, but stronger. The fire crackles faintly. The wind rustles the leaves. Sleep settles over you like dust in a forgotten temple. Light slow, inevitable. Let it take you. Let the world blur. Let the owl keep watch. Sweet dreams.